This was the 18th time Virginia had brought one of her latest distractions home and ordered me to paint them in the middle of their intimacy. Everyone in the room expected a scene they wanted: tears, broken glass, a husband finally driven insane by humiliation. Instead, I sat in front of the canvas, listening to their breathless laughter and whispered comments, and finished the piece without a single tremor in my hand. Quiet. One of Virginia's favorite lapdogs let out a dry, mocking chuckle. Come on, Virginia, your husband has the patience of a saint. Most men would have thrown us all out by now. Virginia slowly buttoned her silk shirt, the corner of her mouth lifting in that familiar lazy sneer. With what authority? The Cross family empire is dead. I paid off his family's debts. Even his late mother's studio is under my name. She glanced at me, eyes cold. Without me, Alan is nothing. I set my brush down and slid over my usual invoice. Custom bedroom scene, $300,000. Virginia didn't even blink. He pushed a check across the table, then placed a thick envelope beside it. Divorce papers. Christian is sensitive, she said, her tone smooth and utterly without warmth. He hates hiding. This arrangement makes him feel cheap. I need you to step aside for a while. Once he feels secure, I'll find a place for you again as my kept man. Of course, the room went still, waiting for the crack in my composure. I picked up the pen and signed my name. The smug expression vanished from Virginia's face. Are you serious? I kept the pen and looked at her completely. You and Christian deserve each other. I'm done playing my part in this twisted game. Virginia's fingers hovered over the papers. She stared at me, searching for the usual panic, the desperation she trained herself to expect. When she found none, she gave a sharp, bitter laugh. Fine. But remember this, Alan, you leave with nothing. Not one thing in the arborist belongs to you. Fine by me. This place had never been a home. It was a gilded cage. Every luxury she gave me was just another link in the chain. My indifference only irritated her more. Before she could speak, Wyatt cut in with a smirk. Usually Christian throws a tantrum and Virginia runs back to him. Now you're trying reverse psychology. Let's see how long she lets you pretend to be strong. The flicker of uncertainty in Virginia's eyes hardened back into arrogance. You're a little too old for games like this. Christian is young. I indulge his moods, but you threatening me with divorce? She reached out, grabbed my chin, and forced me to look at her. It's pathetic. Her icy gaze raked over my face. Look at yourself. You're not the golden boy of the Cross family anymore. Without me, how do you plan to survive? I didn't pull away. My voice stayed flat. I still have my hands. I can paint. Paint. She laughed, as if I'd said something absurd. Everyone in our circle knows you belong to me. Who would dare buy a canvas from Virginia King's discarded husband? I was tired of her constant resentment. She hated me because years ago, when she had nothing, I told her I couldn't marry someone penniless. She never knew the truth behind that choice. She only knew how to make me bleed for it. Now that she held all the power, I signed. I said, looking past her, give me the keys, indeed, to my mother's studio. Virginia smiled, slow and vicious. Christian wants a portrait of us and the child we're expecting. Paint it to his liking, and the studio is yours. The room fell silent. Christian leaned into her, all fragility and softness. Virginia, please don't pressure Alan. He just signed the divorce papers. He must be hurting. He gently stroked her lower belly. And you shouldn't upset yourself. Think of the baby, the baby. My chest tightened. Virginia caught that tiny shift in me and smiled in triumph, surprised. Christian is different from you, Alan. He actually wants to give me a family you never could. She pulled him down onto the sofa. The lights were dimmed, angled toward them like a stage. I stood before the easel, forced to capture their picture of domestic bliss, while her friends whispered behind me, the ex painting the new husband and the unborn child. Virginia really knows how to win. I shut them out and focused on the canvas. Then Virginia told the servants to bring out another painting, covered in a white cloth. The moment she pulled it away, my heart stopped. It was my mother's portrait, her final self-portrait before she died. Virginia placed a palette knife in my hand. Christian loves the composition of this piece. Scrape her face off, paint is in its place. A suffocating silence dropped over the room. That's brutal, Virginia, someone murmured after, barely hidden in their voice, making him desecrate his own mother's memory. Pure evil. Christian bit his lip, still playing the saint. Virginia, please don't. Alan will hate me. He wouldn't dare, Virginia said, never taking her eyes off me. Do it. Alan, and you get your keys. I looked at my mother's painted eyes, at the only piece of her I still had. Ginny wanted to destroy it. Really, she wanted to destroy me. I tightened my grip on the knife. My hand shook, but I forced it still. The first smear of thick white paint dragged across my mother's cheek, and I erased her eyes, her nose, her smile. I covered every trace of her, and rebuilt the face into Christian's sharp, delicate features. When I was done, I set the knife down. Are you satisfied, Miss King? Virginia stared at the ruined canvas. A strange, burning anger flashed across her face. She hadn't expected me to actually do it. Without a word, she snatched a vanilla envelope from her assistant and hurled it at me. The corner sliced my cheek before it hit the floor, spilling the keys and deed papers. Take it and get out, she hissed. Let's see what your art is worth when you're begging on the street. I knelt, gathered the papers, and stood. Alan, she called when I reached the door. If you walk out today, don't ever think about crawling back. Even on your knees. I won't take you back. I gave her a faint smile. I won't. This time I was leaving for good. I didn't leave right away. I went to the tiny storage room at the end of the hall where the last of my mother's things had been shoved. It was barely a room at all, more like a dusty closet Virginia had no use for. In 3 years of marriage, I had never been given a proper bedroom. I slept on the sofa or in the studio. I packed my mother's sketchbooks into a worn leather suitcase. At the bottom sat a small tin box full of scraps from my past with Virginia. Inside was a sticky note from the time she got her first tiny investment. Alan, when I'm rich, I'll buy you the biggest studio in the world. You'll only ever paint what you love. I had believed her. That was why when my family collapsed, I chose to let her hate me and walked away. Instead of dragging her down with me, I sold my award-winning paintings in secret, mortgaged my mother's studio, and poured every dollar into her failing startup. My mother watched me ruin myself for it. She fell ill from the stress and died a year later. When Virginia rose to power and demanded I marry her, all I felt was a toxic mix of joy and suffocating guilt. How could I deserve happiness when my mother had died because of my choices? I took the sticky note, lit it with a match, and watched it curl into ash. Then I went downstairs. Rain hammered the grounds. Outside, 2 security guards blocked the entrance. Mr. Cross, one said stiffly. Miss King ordered that nothing from this estate leaves with you. These are my personal belongings. Alan Christian's voice floated down the stairs. He stood there in a crisp white shirt with Virginia beside him. If they're really yours, you shouldn't mind a quick search. I looked at Virginia. You already gave me the keys. The rest is just my mother's sketchbooks. We'll see about that, she said coldly. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle. Virginia, do you really have to do this? Why should I believe anything you say? You promised you'd never leave me when things got hard, and you ran the second my world started falling apart. She gave the guards a look. They tore the suitcase from my hand and slammed it onto the marble floor. The zipper burst. Clothes and sketchbooks spilled everywhere. I lunged for my mother's main sketchbook, but a guard caught my arm and yanked me back. The blue-bound book slid across the polished floor and stopped at Christian's feet. He bent, picked it up, and started flipping through it. Oh, Virginia, these drawings are beautiful. Can I keep them? Panic exploded in my chest. Don't touch that. I broke free and shoved him back. Christian let out a theatrical cry. His hand slipped, and the sketchbook flew from his fingers, landing face down in the muddy driveway. My mind went blank. My mother's final hand-drawn sketches. I ran into the rain, but before I could reach it, Christian's leather shoe came down hard on the cover, grinding it into the wet gravel. Oops, he whispered, looking down at me. Don't look at me like that, Alan. You're scaring me. Virginia rushed out and pulled him behind her. It's just an old book. I'll buy you a dozen more. You can't buy this, Virginia, I shouted, my voice breaking. Don't you dare raise your voice at me, she snapped. I knelt in the mud and reached for the sketchbook under Christian's shoe. Then Christian cried out sharply. Virginia. He pushed me. Before I could react, Virginia seized my right wrist and twisted with terrifying force. Have you lost your mind, Alan? White-hot pain shot up my arm, but I still wouldn't let go. Of the soaked sketchbook, let go. Instead, she shoved me backward. My foot slipped on the wet stone. My shoulder crashed into the glass display cabinet on the porch, shattered instantly. Acting on reflex, I threw out my right hand to break my fall. A jagged shard of thick glass sliced deep across my wrist. For a second, I felt nothing. Then agony detonated through my arm, and blood poured onto the white stone in a bright, unstoppable stream. Everything went silent. The fury on Virginia's face froze. She stared at my hand, and all the color drained from hers. As the blood spread around us, her hand lifted, trembling. Alan, I looked at her through blurring vision. Are you satisfied now? My hand felt numb, cold, heavy, and I knew with horrible certainty that I would never hold a paintbrush again. 20 years of practice, discipline, of pouring my soul into canvas after canvas ended there in rain and blood. Virginia took one step toward me. Then Christian suddenly gasped and clutched his head. Virginia, my head. I feel dizzy. She turned at once. Christian sagged against the door frame, tears streaming down his face. Alan lunged at me. I was so scared. I know he didn't mean to, but he collapsed into her arms. The panic in Virginia's eyes vanished. When she looked back at me, all that remained was disgust. You'd even hurt a pregnant, defenseless person just to get back at me. I lay in the mud, shaking from pain and shock. I didn't hurt him enough. Her voice turned glacial. You think mutilating yourself will make me feel guilty? Stop acting, Alan. She turned to her assistant. Get him out of here. Send him to Stonehaven's psychiatric facility. Let them teach him some discipline. Then she carried Christian to the car. Without looking back, the guards dragged me across the gravel. The pain in my wrist was so blinding. I blacked out before they shoved me into the transport van. I woke in a sterile room. A male nurse approached with a syringe. On the chart hanging beside my bed, I saw a bright red sticker. Allergic warning. Do not administer. I started thrashing, trying to get away. But then Christian's voice drifted in from the hallway. Alan always has trouble staying quiet. Give him the shot. I'll keep him peaceful. Guards pin me down. The needle slid into my skin. Within seconds, my lungs locked. I couldn't breathe. My throat closed, and the fluorescent lights above me started to spin. I reached out with my right hand. My fingers didn't move. 3 days later, Virginia arrived at Stonehaven. Wyatt looked uneasy. Virginia wasn't sending him here a little much. He's still your husband. Virginia scoffed. My people were watching him. No one would dare lay a hand on him. It was just a lesson. The facility director was waiting for her, pale and sweating. Miss King, his voice shook. Mr. Cross suffered a severe anaphylactic reaction. 3 nights ago, we tried to resuscitate him, but he swallowed hard. He's dead. Virginia didn't react. Not at first. The director kept talking, words tumbling over themselves. We followed procedure. We called emergency services. There was an investigation. Stop. The single word cut through the room. Virginia stared at him. Dead. Alan Cross. The man who had survived every humiliation she threw at him? The man who could sit through 18 public betrayals without shedding a tear? The man who had looked her in the eye and promised he would never come back? Dead. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Bring him out. The director hesitated. Miss King. Now. 20 minutes later, she stood inside the facility morgue. The steel drawer slid open. Alan lay inside. Still. Cold. His face looked strangely peaceful. No anger. No resentment. No desperation. Just silence. Virginia's chest tightened unexpectedly. She reached out. Her fingers touched his cheek. Ice cold. For the first time since she'd known him, Alan didn't react to her touch. A nurse quietly handed over his personal effects. A watch. A wallet. A hospital bracelet. And a sealed envelope. Addressed to Virginia King. Her stomach twisted. She opened it immediately. Inside was a single folded letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Alan's. Virginia, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I didn't expect to die. Despite what you believed, I never wanted revenge against you. Not even at the end. There's something I should have told you years ago. The day you begged me to marry you, I wanted to say yes. I loved you. I loved you enough to spend every dollar I had trying to save your company. I sold my paintings. I mortgaged my mother's studio. I emptied the Cross family trust. I lied and told you I didn't want a poor woman because I knew the debt collectors were about to destroy my family. If you stayed with me, they would have destroyed you too. So I made you hate me. It seemed kinder. I was wrong. Everything after that was my punishment. Don't blame yourself for my death. I'm tired. Take care of yourself. And please, try to be happy. Alan. The letter slipped from her fingers. The room became eerily quiet. Wyatt picked it up. Read it. Then read it again. The color drained from his face. What? His voice cracked. What the hell is this? Virginia couldn't answer. Because she remembered. Suddenly. Painfully. Everything. The anonymous investor who saved her startup. The account that mysteriously paid off her company's debts. The gallery owner who once drunkenly mentioned Alan selling masterpieces for almost nothing. The lawyer who had tried to tell her something after the wedding. Every clue she'd ignored. Every warning she'd dismissed. Every chance she'd had to learn the truth. She sank to her knees beside the morgue drawer. No. The word escaped as a whisper. No. The director looked confused. Wyatt looked horrified. Virginia's hands began shaking uncontrollably. For years she had convinced herself that Alan abandoned her because he was arrogant. Because he was cruel. Because he thought she wasn't good enough. She built her hatred around that belief. Built her entire identity around it. Now that belief was gone. And all that remained was the reality. Alan had sacrificed everything for her. And she had spent 3 years destroying him. The room started spinning. Christian. The affair. The humiliations. The portraits. His mother's painting. The sketchbook in the mud. The shattered wrist. The psychiatric facility. The injection. The death. One memory after another crashed into her like waves. She suddenly remembered Alan kneeling in the rain. Protecting that sketchbook. Begging. Not for money. Not for status. For his mother's last drawings. And she'd called him pathetic. A strangled sound escaped her throat. Then another. Then suddenly she was sobbing. Violently. Uncontrollably. The kind of crying that hurt. The kind that left no dignity behind. The staff exchanged uncomfortable looks. No one knew what to do. Virginia grabbed Alan's cold hand. Wake up. Silence. Alan. Nothing. Wake up. Her voice broke. I know the truth now. Nothing. Please. The tears wouldn't stop. I'll give everything back. Nothing. The studio. Silence. The paintings. Nothing. My company. Nothing. Take it all. Her shoulders shook. Just wake up. But Alan Cross remained still. And for the first time in her life, Virginia King realized there was no amount of money, power, or influence capable of buying back the one thing she had truly lost. 3 days later, the funeral was held. The rain fell all morning. Only a handful of people attended. A few elderly artists. Several former gallery owners. His mother's old friends. Virginia stood in the back, dressed in black, uninvited, unwanted. When the service ended, a gray-haired woman approached her. She was one of Alan's mother's closest friends. The woman slapped Virginia across the face so hard the entire cemetery heard it. No one stopped her. No one defended Virginia. The old woman stared at her with tears in her eyes. That boy worshipped you. Another slap. You were his entire world. A third. And you killed him. Virginia didn't move. Didn't defend herself. Didn't speak. Because for once, she had nothing left to say. Then, from the crowd, a familiar voice rang out. Actually, everyone turned. A man in a dark coat stepped forward holding a thick folder. Alan's former lawyer. His expression was cold. That's not the most interesting part. He looked directly at Virginia. Miss King, there's something about Alan Cross you never knew. Then he opened the folder and revealed the first page. The title read, Cross Foundation Holdings. Below it was a number so large that every person present froze, including Virginia. And for the first time since Alan's death, she felt genuine fear. The cemetery fell silent. Virginia stared at the figure printed at the bottom of the page. Then she laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. Is this supposed to be a joke? The lawyer closed the folder with a snap. I don't joke at funerals. Wyatt frowned. I've never heard of Cross Foundation Holdings. You weren't supposed to. The lawyer looked toward Alan's casket. Mr. Cross instructed me to reveal this only after his death. Virginia's voice hardened. Explain. The lawyer took a slow breath. Everyone believed the Cross family collapsed completely. They did, Virginia interrupted. No. He shook his head. The public Cross family collapsed. The private assets did not. A ripple of confusion spread through the mourners. The Cross family spent generations collecting artwork, intellectual property, overseas investments, and royalties. Before the creditors could seize everything, Alan legally separated the family's remaining assets into a charitable holding company. Virginia frowned. Impossible. It was perfectly legal. The lawyer handed several documents to Wyatt. You can verify every registration yourself. Wyatt skimmed the pages. His face slowly lost all color. They are genuine. The lawyer continued. Alan made himself the sole trustee. Virginia's heartbeat quickened. If he had all this money, she whispered, why didn't he use it? The lawyer's eyes turned icy. Because it wasn't his. It belonged to his mother's foundation. It funded scholarships for young artists. It restored museums. It paid for children who couldn't afford art school. He refused to spend a single dollar on himself. Virginia felt as though someone had struck her. He lived like that. By choice. No. The lawyer corrected her quietly. By principle. He believed some promises were more important than comfort. A long silence followed. Then he opened another envelope. There's one more thing. He removed a folded certificate. 3 months before entering Stonehaven, Alan amended his will. Virginia looked up hopefully. The foundation? It no longer belongs to him. Relief flickered across her face. Then it passes to me. The lawyer looked at her with open contempt. No. Her smile froze. It was donated. To whom? He unfolded the final page. The National Academy for Young Artists. The entire foundation. The studios. The galleries. The copyrights. The investment portfolio. The collection of over 800 original paintings. Everything. Virginia's breathing became shallow. No. The transfer became legally effective the moment his death was certified. She staggered backward. My husband owned all of that. And left me nothing? The lawyer answered without emotion. Not nothing. He reached into his briefcase one last time. There was one item specifically addressed to you. He handed her a small wooden box. With trembling fingers, Virginia opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring. Their wedding ring. Beneath it lay a tiny note. Just one sentence. In Alan's handwriting. I finally kept my promise and let you go. Virginia's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the wet grass, clutching the ring so tightly it cut into her palm. For the first time in years, there was no anger left. No pride. No victory. Only unbearable regret. Across the cemetery, Christian watched from beneath a black umbrella. His expression remained mournful until Virginia couldn't see him. Then the sadness vanished. The corner of his mouth curled into a faint smile. Very faint. Almost invisible. The lawyer noticed. So did Wyatt. Their eyes met. Something wasn't right. Wyatt thought back to the psychiatric facility. Christian had been the one who insisted on the injection. He had known about Alan's allergy. He had always arrived just in time to play the victim. The timing. The tears. The fainting spells. The pregnancy. A chill ran down Wyatt's spine. He looked at Christian again. Christian met his gaze. For just a fraction of a second, the gentle, timid mask slipped. His eyes were cold, calculating, and amused. Then he smiled sweetly once more and rested a hand on his stomach. Wyatt's blood ran cold. A terrible realization settled over him. Alan hadn't been the real target. He had simply been the obstacle. And Christian had just won. Or so he believed. Christian waited until the cemetery emptied. He dabbed at the corners of his eyes with a handkerchief, accepted a few murmured condolences, and slipped into the back seat of Virginia's car. The moment the door shut, his grieving expression disappeared. Drive. The chauffeur glanced in the mirror. Home, sir. No. The clinic. He rested a hand on his stomach and smiled to himself. Everything had gone exactly as planned. Alan was dead. Virginia was drowning in guilt. The foundation had slipped away, but Virginia still controlled King Group, one of the largest companies in the country. That was enough. She was emotionally broken. Broken people were easy to manipulate. At the cemetery gates, Wyatt didn't leave. He stood beside the lawyer, watching Christian's car disappear. You saw it too. The lawyer nodded once. The smile. Wyatt swallowed. I've watched that man cry on command for almost 3 years. The lawyer's expression darkened. Then perhaps it's time someone looked into him. He reached into his briefcase again. I was debating whether to reveal this. What is it? A report Alan commissioned. Wyatt frowned. Alan hired investigators? He didn't trust Christian. Wyatt's eyes widened. The lawyer handed him a sealed file. He never opened it. What? He canceled the investigation halfway through. Why? The lawyer looked toward Alan's grave. He said, his voice softened. If I investigate him, Virginia will think I'm trying to destroy someone she loves. I'd rather she hate me than lose another person because of me. Wyatt closed his eyes. Even at the end, he was trying to protect her. That night, Virginia couldn't sleep. Alan's empty letter echoed in her mind. Try to be happy. The words hurt more than any accusation. She wandered into the room that had once been his studio. It was nearly empty. Only paint stains remained on the wooden floor. She knelt and touched one absent-mindedly. Her fingertips brushed against something loose beneath the floorboards. She frowned. Alan had always repaired things himself. She pried up the board. Beneath it sat a narrow metal box. Locked. Her breath caught. She rushed to the lawyer the next morning. He examined it. I've seen this before. He reached into his pocket. Alan's keyring. Among the keys was one tiny brass key. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked. Inside lay dozens of letters, sketches, receipts, bank transfers, and one thick envelope labeled, for Virginia. Only if you finally want the truth. Virginia's hands shook so violently she could barely break the seal. The first page was covered in dates. Every date matched a moment she had believed Alan betrayed her. Beside each one, proof. Proof of what had actually happened. The day he rejected her proposal, he had transferred nearly every remaining dollar he owned into her failing company. The day he disappeared for a week, he had been negotiating with creditors to stop them from seizing her apartment. The day she believed he sold her engagement ring, the receipt showed he had pawned his own family heirloom instead. Virginia stopped reading. Her vision blurred. No. She turned another page. There was one final receipt. Hospital. Payment. Patient, Eleanor Cross. Outstanding balance. Paid by, Alan Cross. Date. The day his mother died. He had paid every cent trying to save her. He hadn't abandoned his mother for Virginia. He had tried to save both. And lost them both. Virginia pressed the papers against her chest and broke down all over again. Behind her, Wyatt silently picked up the remaining contents of the box. Near the bottom was a photograph. It showed Christian, not with Virginia, with an unfamiliar middle-aged man. The back of the photo had only 3 handwritten words. Follow the money. Wyatt stared at it. The lawyer slowly looked up. Neither man spoke, but they reached the same conclusion. Alan may have stopped investigating. They wouldn't. And somewhere in the city, completely unaware, Christian smiled as he stepped out of a private clinic. The doctor handed him an envelope. Christian glanced inside. His pleasant smile vanished. His face turned deathly pale. He whispered just 2 words. Impossible. He read the report again. Then a third time. The result hadn't changed. His hand slowly drifted to his stomach. The report stated clearly. No evidence of pregnancy. Christian stood frozen in the clinic hallway. No. He snatched the report from the doctor's hand. There has to be a mistake. The doctor frowned. We repeated the examination twice. There is no pregnancy. Christian's face drained of color. But everyone believed. The symptoms you described could have many causes. Stress, hormonal changes, medication, but you are not pregnant. Christian's fingers tightened around the report until it crumpled. If this leaves this room. The doctor cut him off. Medical records are confidential. Christian walked out without another word. For the first time since meeting Virginia, he felt fear. Real fear. Meanwhile, Wyatt hired a private investigative firm using his own money. Within 48 hours, the first report arrived. The investigator slid a folder across the table. I think you're Mr. Christian has been lying for a very long time. Inside were photographs. Christian meeting secretly with Stonehaven's deputy director. Christian transferring money to a nurse. Christian entering a private clinic weeks before Alan was committed. Wyatt's expression darkened. What about the injection? The investigator nodded. We obtained internal messages. One message read, ignore the allergy warning. The patient only needs to stay unconscious for a while. Another came minutes later. If something happens, Miss King will handle it. Wyatt's blood ran cold. Virginia was sitting alone in Alan's restored studio when Wyatt burst inside. His face was pale. You need to read this. She barely looked up. I don't care about the company anymore. You will. He placed the photographs in front of her. Virginia frowned. What is this? As she turned each page, her breathing slowed, then stopped. A bank transfer. Christian. Stonehaven. Another payment. The nurse. Another. The psychiatrist. Another. The security guard who dragged Alan away. Then, the clinic report. No evidence of pregnancy. Virginia stared at the words. Again. 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 No. Wyatt spoke quietly. There never was a baby. Virginia's hands began shaking. No. It was fabricated. No. She threw the folder across the room. It can't be. Wyatt didn't flinch. The investigation also found surveillance footage. He pressed play. The screen showed the driveway outside the mansion. Rain poured. Alan reached for the sketchbook. Christian looked around. Then, without Alan touching him, Christian deliberately threw himself backward. Seconds later he screamed, "Virginia!" He pushed me. Virginia stumbled backward as if struck. Her knees hit the floor. She remembered. She had never actually seen Alan push him. She had believed Christian immediately. Then another clip played. The clinic hallway. Christian speaking calmly to the head nurse. "Give him the injection. He has an allergy. It doesn't matter. I'll take responsibility." The video ended. Silence. Virginia couldn't breathe. Her mind replayed every moment. Alan begging. Alan bleeding. Alan gasping for air. Alan lying in a morgue. Because she had believed the wrong person. Her stomach lurched violently. She ran to the nearest trash bin and vomited. Again and again. Christian returned to the mansion that evening. He smiled as he entered. "Virginia." No answer. The lights suddenly came on. The entire living room was full. Board members, lawyers, police detectives, Wyatt, the private investigator. Virginia sat silently in an armchair. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Christian froze. "Virginia?" She slowly stood. There was no rage on her face. Only emptiness. "You lied." Christian forced a laugh. "What are you talking about?" She tossed the medical report at him. It landed at his feet. His smile vanished. Then came the surveillance photos. The bank records. The nurse's confession. The security footage. One piece after another. His mask cracked. "You had me declared mentally unstable." Virginia's voice was barely above a whisper. "You framed Alan." Silence. "You faked a pregnancy." Silence. "You bribed a hospital." Silence. "You ordered them to ignore his allergy." Christian finally laughed. A slow, cold, mocking laugh. "So what if I did?" Everyone in the room froze. He shrugged. "You would have chosen me anyway." Virginia's heart stopped. "You always did." He smiled cruelly. "You wanted someone to hate. You hated Alan before I even arrived. I just gave you excuses." Every word was another knife. "You know what's funny?" He stepped closer. "I never expected him to die. I only wanted him locked away." His grin widened. "But once he did, you became mine." The sound of the slap echoed through the mansion. Virginia struck him so hard, he crashed into a marble table. Blood dripped from his mouth. He looked up, still smiling. "You finally hit the right person." Before he could move, detectives surrounded him. One officer stepped forward. "Christian Hale, you're under arrest on suspicion of fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and your alleged involvement in the unlawful medical treatment that resulted in Alan Cross's death. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked shut, Christian looked at Virginia one last time. "You can imprison me." He smiled through bloody lips. "But every morning, you'll wake up remembering. You killed the only person who ever truly loved you." Virginia didn't answer. She couldn't. Because this time, it wasn't a lie. And that truth would haunt her long after Christian was taken away. Christian's trial lasted nearly a year. His carefully constructed image collapsed piece by piece. Former nurses testified. Security guards admitted they had followed his orders in exchange for money. The deputy director of Stonehaven confessed to altering Alan's medical records. The jury returned guilty verdicts on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and crimes connected to the unlawful treatment that led to Alan's death. As Christian was led away in handcuffs, he glanced back only once. Virginia wasn't there. She had stopped attending long before the verdict. The public, however, had not forgotten her. Every headline carried her name beside Alan's. Billionaire CEO's cruel treatment of husband exposed. Artist dies after wrongful commitment. King Group faces investor revolt. The story spread around the world. Artists boycotted her galleries. Months later, she rented a tiny apartment above an old grocery store. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The heater barely worked. There was just enough room for a bed, a table, and one chair. Every morning she woke before sunrise. Not because she wanted to. Because nightmares refused to let her sleep. She always dreamed the same dream. Alan stood in the rain, reaching for his mother's sketchbook. He looked at her and asked quietly, "Are you satisfied now?" Then she would wake up crying. One autumn afternoon, Virginia walked past a museum. A crowd stretched around the block. A banner hung above the entrance. The Alan Cross Memorial Exhibition. She stood across the street for nearly an hour before gathering the courage to enter. No one recognized the thin woman in a faded coat. Inside, children laughed as they copied Alan's paintings onto little canvases. Young artists whispered excitedly about his brushwork. An elderly guide smiled warmly. He believed art should heal people. Virginia lowered her head. Heal. That was the word she had stolen from him. The final room contained only one painting. It had never been sold. It was the last painting Alan completed before leaving her mansion. The portrait of Virginia and Christian. Except, the museum had restored it. Using infrared imaging, conservators had discovered another painting hidden beneath the top layer. Alan hadn't simply painted over his mother's portrait. Before covering it, he had painted one final image underneath. It showed a young Virginia, standing in front of a tiny rented office, smiling as she held her first business license. In the corner, Alan had written only 7 words. To the girl who once believed in dreams. Virginia collapsed onto a bench. She cried harder than she had at the funeral. Because even after everything, the last hidden painting he left behind wasn't one of hatred. It was a memory of the woman he had loved before bitterness consumed them both. Years passed. The Alan Cross Foundation grew into one of the country's most respected supporters of young artists. Every scholarship carried his name. Every exhibition told his story. His mother's studio became a place where children painted for free. Laughter filled the rooms that had once known only grief. Virginia never went inside. She couldn't. Instead, once a year, she left fresh white lilies outside the gate before dawn. She never signed a card. She never knocked. She always left before anyone arrived. One winter morning, an elderly groundskeeper noticed her lingering by the entrance. You knew Mr. Cross? Virginia looked at the studio. I did. He was a remarkable man. Yes. He forgave people too easily. A faint, broken smile crossed her lips. Yes. He really did. The groundskeeper nodded toward a bronze plaque at the entrance. You should read it. After he walked away, Virginia stepped closer. The plaque bore Alan's favorite words. The purpose of art is not to preserve perfection, but to leave behind kindness. She reached out and touched the engraved letters. For a long time, she simply stood there. Then she whispered into the cold morning air. I'm sorry. There was no answer. Only the wind rustling through the trees. She closed her eyes. At last, she understood the cruelest punishment of all. It wasn't losing her wealth. It wasn't losing her company. It wasn't living alone. It was knowing that the one person who would have forgiven her was the one person she would never